The first thing that struck me when I stepped into the dining room was how little had changed. The wallpaper, a faded cream pattern with small golden vines, still curled slightly at the corners near the ceiling. The chandelier above the oak table still flickered faintly, as if tired of carrying its own weight after so many years. The smell of lemon polish and roasted turkey mingled with the faint trace of old upholstery, the kind of scent that had clung to my childhood without ever asking permission. And yet, despite everything being familiar, it felt foreign. Perhaps because I was no longer the child who once sat at this table desperate for acknowledgement. Perhaps because the woman I had become no longer belonged in this house. I slid my overnight bag discreetly by the door. No one noticed. No one asked how long I would be staying. My mother gave me the briefest nod, a silent instruction to sit in the chair nearest the kitchen door, far from the glowing heart of conversation. The seat felt less like an invitation and more like a placement, as though even now I had to be positioned on the margins. The plate in front of me was already filled. Turkey slices, mashed potatoes, carrots glazed until sticky. I had not chosen the portion, nor had anyone asked what I liked. Someone else had decided for me. I picked up my fork, tapped the tines against the plate, and let the sound vanish beneath the roar of voices that surrounded me. The table was alive with chatter. My aunts argued cheerfully about holiday sales and which store had the best discounts on winter coats. My cousins swapped stories about their children, phones flashing with photos they passed around proudly. My father leaned forward, his expression rapt as Luca gestured with easy confidence, explaining something grand and ambitious. It was not hard to guess the subject. Boxes of gifts were piled high along the edge of the table. Silver ribbons, glossy red wrapping paper, bows curled into perfect spirals. I traced the rhythm of the gift exchange with my eyes, hands stretched out, paper ripped open, smiles widened. Gratitude bloomed, sometimes overacted, but always performed with gusto. There was no box for me. I had known there would not be. Still, the emptiness in front of my chair shouted louder than any present could. Absence is louder than presence, I thought. It presses into the silence, demanding to be heard. Luca laughed at one of his own comments, leaning back in his chair as though the entire evening had been designed for his comfort. On his wrist gleamed a watch, new and expensive, catching the glow of the chandelier above. He twisted his wrist subtly, making sure the light danced across the metal where everyone could see. "Dad, it's not just a startup," Luca said, his tone equal parts casual and commanding. "This is a new paradigm for media consumption, a revolution in how people experience content. We're not just talking growth, we're talking disruption at scale." Disruption at scale. I almost smiled. I had heard those words in countless conference rooms where men with too much ambition and too little expertise tried to sound like prophets. Luca had never worked a single overnight shift, had never watched servers crash in the dark hours of morning, had never been the one to code until his eyes blurred. Yet here he was, packaging jargon into promises, and everyone listened as though he were unveiling a miracle. My mother's hand touched his arm, her face glowing with pride. "Tell them more, Luca. Tell them about the prototype. They should hear how brilliant you've been." So he did. He spoke with sweeping gestures, his voice rising and falling like a conductor guiding an orchestra. He spoke of investors who were almost ready, of algorithms that were practically finished, of markets that were hungry for disruption. Every sentence was wrapped in the sheen of possibility, and no one seemed to notice how empty it all was. They nodded, impressed not by the content but by the confidence. I lifted my glass of wine, swirling the liquid before taking a slow sip. It was dry, almost bitter, the kind of wine chosen more for display than enjoyment. I let it sit on my tongue before swallowing, imagining it burning more than it did. I wished it could sear away the familiar ache that rose in my chest. This was how it had always been. The spotlight belonged to Luca. The rest of us were audience members, clapping when cued. And me, always me, I had been written out of the script altogether. I pressed my hands together in my lap, rubbing thumb against palm, grounding myself in the texture of skin against skin. I wanted to stay steady, to keep from unraveling. Because every laugh, every cheer for him, every proud glance from my parents was a knife turning in the same old wound. I remembered being 10 years old. Luca had unwrapped a brand new bicycle, crimson red with shining chrome handlebars. The kind of gift that made a child feel like the world was theirs. My parents had clapped and cheered as he pedaled down the driveway, his laughter carrying into the summer air. I had watched from the porch, a pair of socks clutched in my lap, my own birthday gift a few months earlier. My mother had shrugged, saying girls didn't need bikes anyway. I had borrowed the neighbor's discarded one, riding it until the tires split open. That memory surfaced now, unbidden, as I watched Luca bask in attention. My parents were smiling the same way they had smiled then, pride radiating outward, never once aimed in my direction. I poked at the turkey on my plate. It was dry, overcooked, as though it had been waiting too long for someone to care enough to serve it fresh. A fitting metaphor for this evening. For me. Marissa, his wife, sat beside him, her hand resting gently over the curve of her belly. She laughed at every joke, her face a picture of admiration. When Luca leaned in to kiss her temple, the table erupted in applause, the family expanding. The future celebrated. I smiled politely, though inside I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. I was happy for them, I truly was, but I could not ignore the sharp contrast. Their future was a parade. Mine was a quiet, steady climb in the dark. None of them knew about the systems I had built, the contracts I had secured, the nights I had spent ensuring networks held against attacks. None of them knew about the team I led, the responsibility that rested on my shoulders. None of them had asked. "Rose," my uncle's voice cut through the noise. For the first time that evening, attention flickered toward me. "You're still working with computers, right?" I cleared my throat, feeling the weight of every gaze, brief though it was. "Yes, cybersecurity," he chuckled, waving a hand dismissively. "Like fixing passwords and that sort of thing?" Before I could answer, his attention shifted back to Luca, his laughter joining the rest. My words dissolved into the hum of the room. I let the silence swallow me. There was no point explaining. They would not understand, and worse, they would not care. Luca turned his head slightly, smirking. "Still doing the techie basement thing, huh?" The table erupted in laughter again. Not cruel laughter, not sharp, just careless. The kind of laughter that stings more because it is thoughtless. I forced my lips into a small smile. Something like that. And that was that. The spotlight swung back to him, and I returned to invisibility. I chewed slowly, listening to the tide of voices and laughter crash against me. My mind wandered to my apartment in Chicago, to the glass windows that looked out over the skyline. At night, the city lights pulsed like a heartbeat. That was where I belonged. That was where I had built a life no one here would ever see. And yet here I was at the same table in the same chair near the kitchen door, the girl with socks instead of a bicycle, the woman with silence instead of recognition. I thought I had left this behind. But some things, it seemed, refused to change. The room carried on around me like a river I could not step into. I listened to the flow of voices and laughter, each word slipping past me, never meant for me. It was strange to feel both present and absent at once, like I was a ghost haunting my own family. My cousin Olivia leaned across the table, holding up a shiny bracelet Luca had given her daughter. "Isn't this gorgeous? Luca, you always pick the best gifts. You're so thoughtful." He smiled as though it were only natural. "I pay attention," he said simply, and the table nodded as if wisdom had been spoken. I lowered my eyes to the faint scratches on the surface of my plate. I remembered birthdays where no one had paid attention to me. 14 years old, bringing home straight A's, waiting all evening for someone to ask, to notice, to care. They never did. And when I dared to speak, my words had vanished into silence, as though tossed into a well with no echo. I shook the memory away and reached for my wine again, draining the glass more quickly this time. My mother's voice rose over the chatter. "Rose, you'll need to move your things later. Your old room is Luca's office now. We set up the couch for you in the living room." A blanket statement, matter of fact, without apology. My room, the one space that had once been mine, now claimed for his ambition. I nodded, forcing my voice to remain even. "Of course." The couch, always the couch. I had slept there so many times as a teenager when relatives visited, even though Luca's room had stayed untouched, sacred. Some things never changed. Dinner pressed on. Plates were filled and emptied. Conversations swelled and shifted, but always circled back to Luca. His plans, his future, his brilliance. At one point, my father raised his glass again. "Family helps family," he declared, "and we'll do everything we can to make sure Luca's project succeeds." The words struck me with quiet force. Family helps family. I wondered where that mantra had been when I was 20 and struggling to pay for textbooks, when I had asked for help and was told to take out loans, when my achievements had been met with shrugs while every step Luca took was met with applause. The ache tightened in my chest. I chewed my food slowly, tasting nothing. Later, after plates had been cleared and desserts brought out, I excused myself quietly. No one tried to stop me. The living room felt dimmer than I remembered. The couch sagged under my weight as I sank into it. I pulled the scratchy blanket my mother had left for me around my shoulders. Upstairs, I could hear the laughter continuing, muffled by walls but still sharp enough to cut. I stared at the ceiling and thought of the apartment waiting for me in Chicago, the wide windows, the quiet hum of the city at night. The friends who had cheered at my graduation with a pizza box painted like a banner because no one else had been there to clap. I thought of the countless nights in college, cleaning hotel rooms until my hands ached, tutoring younger students in Python for a little extra money, coding until dawn. I had not partied, had not dated, had not done any of the things that filled the lives of people my age. I had worked. Because work was the only way to outrun the version of me they had written off. And I had outrun her. I had become someone they could not afford to ignore. And yet, sitting here on this couch, listening to their laughter above me, I felt the old invisibility wrap around me again, as if nothing I had built could ever erase what this house had taught me, that I was always less. I pulled the blanket tighter and closed my eyes. I did not cry. I had stopped crying years ago. Tears were wasted here. Instead, I whispered into the darkness, just loud enough for myself to hear. This time, I won't let them rewrite me. But even as I said it, I felt the shadow of doubt creep in. Because here, in this house, surrounded by this family, it was so easy to become invisible again. The night stretched on in fragments, each moment pressing into me like a thumb against a bruise. I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, steady and indifferent, counting down the minutes I was forced to endure. Luca's laughter carried easily through the walls, blending with the voices of my parents and cousins. The sound was almost rhythmic, rising and falling like waves against a shore. I had grown up with that soundtrack. I knew every note. His laugh was approval, belonging, affirmation. Mine had been silence, the kind of silence that grows so thick it becomes its own presence. I lay on the couch staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster. They spread outward like rivers on a map, each one a reminder of how old this house was, how little it had changed, how tightly it clung to the past. I wondered if the cracks had been there when I was a child, and if I had stared at them then too, searching for patterns, for escape routes. My thoughts wandered back to the first time I realized I was invisible. I had been 13, standing quietly on the stairs while my parents and Luca celebrated his perfect report card. The living room glowed with light, their laughter echoing. I had clutched my own report card, filled with the same straight A's, waiting for someone to ask, for someone to notice. No one had. Eventually, I had folded the paper carefully and tucked it back into my backpack. That was the night I understood that my achievements were irrelevant in this house. I felt the same weight now, pressing into me as I lay beneath the scratchy blanket. The couch dipped suddenly as someone sat down at the other end. I turned my head slightly. It was Marissa, her hands folded over her belly. She offered me a small smile, tentative, as though she knew she was stepping into territory she did not fully understand. "Tired?" she asked softly. "A little," I said, my voice even. She nodded. "It's always a lot here. Your family has so much energy." Energy. That was one way to describe it. I only hummed in response. For a moment, silence stretched between us. Then she shifted slightly, her eyes on the floor. "Luca talks about you sometimes. He says you're smart but quiet. I think he admires you more than he lets on." I almost laughed at that. Admiration was not something I had ever felt from him, but I did not argue. "Maybe," I said. She gave me another small smile, then pushed herself up. "Rest well, Rose." When she left, the silence returned, heavier than before. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of distant laughter fade into the background. I drifted into memory again, carried back to my first night in Chicago. My dorm room had been barely larger than a closet, the mattress thin, the walls papered with peeling paint. Outside, the city had roared, sirens, music, footsteps pounding on pavement. I had cried into a borrowed pillow, wondering if I had made a mistake. But then I had gone to class the next morning, and for the first time, the world had made sense. Code was honest in a way people never were. Systems followed rules. Effort equaled results. If something broke, you could fix it. That clarity became my anchor. I joined the tech club. I cleaned hotel rooms at night to pay for books. I tutored underclassmen in Python, patched laptops for a few extra dollars. I did not party. I did not date. I worked. Because work was the only path forward. By my junior year, I was interning at a cybersecurity firm. I was the youngest there, the only woman on the floor, the one who never asked for help. They respected that. By the end of the summer, I had a job offer. By graduation, I had colleagues who relied on my work, systems that would not run without me. I had built something real, something solid, something mine. And yet, lying here on this couch, the weight of invisibility still pressed into me. All the degrees, the contracts, the money, none of it mattered in this house. Here, I was still the girl with socks instead of a bicycle. Morning light crept in too early, pale and gray through the curtains. I pushed myself up, muscles stiff from the lumpy couch. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. When I walked in, the family was already gathered, voices rising in cheerful chaos. Presents were stacked high under the tree, ribbons spilling onto the floor. Children darted between legs, squealing with delight. I found a place on the edge, watching as gifts were distributed. My cousins unwrapped boxes of toys, sweaters, electronics. Adults opened envelopes of gift cards, bottles of wine, kitchen gadgets. The room glowed with wrapping paper and laughter. Then it was my turn, or it should have been. "Oh," my mother said too loudly, clapping her hands together. "Rose, we completely forgot." Luca laughed. "Just like the good old days. Don't cry this time, sis." The room chuckled. I felt something inside me still, not rage, not pain, but a deep clarity. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small object. My keys. The steel glinted in the morning light. "What's that?" my father asked. "The keys to my apartment," I said. "Two-bedroom condo in Chicago, hardwood floors, built-in smart security system, fully paid off." Silence fell across the room. "You bought an apartment?" my mother asked, her eyes wide. "Yes." "With what money?" "My job," I replied evenly. "My company licensed a security framework I built. The bonus was $160,000 after taxes." Forks froze midair. Luca's jaw tightened. Marissa's smile faltered. My father leaned forward, disbelief etched on his face. "You've been making that kind of money for years?" My mother's tone shifted instantly, her voice warm and syrupy. "Sweetheart, why didn't you tell us? We're so proud of you." Proud, the word rang hollow. I looked at their faces, the sudden reversal, the eager interest. For a moment, I almost laughed, but I didn't. Instead, I rose slowly. "I should pack," I said. "I've got a long drive back." They protested, voices tumbling over one another, begging me to stay, insisting we had so much to catch up on. But I had already seen enough. Upstairs, I gathered my things quickly, my bag still unzipped, my resolve zipped tight. When I came down, they were waiting. My parents stood near the doorway, arms folded. Luca and Marissa flanked them, faces carefully arranged. "Before you go," my father began, "we wanted to talk to you about something important." I raised an eyebrow but stayed silent. Luca stepped forward, smiling with the same cocky ease he had worn since high school. "This startup I've been building, it's really close to taking off, just needs a little push. Capital mostly." "How much?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. $200,000, he said. "That would get us rolling." My mother nodded eagerly. "It's an investment, honey. You'd be helping family." "Yeah," Luca added. "With what you're making, it's nothing. You said you got that big bonus, right?" And there it was. The reason they remembered me. The reason I had been summoned back into their orbit. I looked around the room, at the same walls that had heard my silence as a child, at the same faces that had forgotten me year after year. And in that moment, the ache inside me hardened into something else. "No," I said plainly. The word landed like a stone in a still pond. The silence stretched, brittle and sharp. My mother blinked at me, her mouth opening and closing like she had forgotten the words she meant to use. My father's expression hardened, disbelief giving way to something closer to anger. Luca's smirk faltered for the first time that evening, the edges of his confidence cracking. "What do you mean, no?" my mother asked finally, her voice pitched higher than usual, brittle with disbelief. "I mean," I said slowly, my voice steady, "that I am not giving you $200,000. I am not giving you $2. I am not giving you anything." The words hung in the air like frost. "But we're family," my father said, as though the word itself were currency, as though it alone should be enough to bind me into compliance. I let out a short laugh. Not bitter, not cruel, just honest. "You mean now we're family? Now that you think I'm useful?" The room stilled. Their faces were a gallery of shock and offense. But I had more to say, words that had been gathering for years, words that had sat in my chest like stones waiting to be thrown. "Where was this family?" I asked quietly. "When I needed help covering textbooks and you told me to take out loans? Where was this family when you turned my bedroom into an office before I had even left for college, while Luca's room stayed untouched like a shrine? Where was this family when I asked for a car to get to campus and you told me to take the bus, while Luca got a brand new one the second he turned 16? My mother's face pinched, her lips trembling with indignation. "That was different. Things were tight back then." I nodded slowly. "Tight for me, but not for him, not for Luca. He showed promise," she blurted, then winced at her own words. "I mean, we thought college might not be the right fit for you." The sting landed, even though I had heard it before in countless forms. Not the right fit, not worth the risk, not enough. Luca stepped forward, puffing his chest like he still wore his high school letterman jacket. Unbelievable. You make it big and suddenly you think you're better than us. I met his glare evenly. I don't think I'm better. I think I'm finally done pretending we were ever equal. His face reddened. You selfish brat, after all we've done for you. For me? The words tore out of me sharper than I expected. You mean tolerating me while worshiping you? You mean throwing jokes at my expense at every dinner table? You mean forgetting me every holiday and pretending it was some innocent slip-up? My mother's voice cracked into the argument, shrill and trembling. We gave you a roof. We gave you food. That was parenting, Rose. Parenting, I repeated, my voice flat and cold. It felt more like charity, and you made sure I knew every day that I was never wanted. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that presses against the walls. I could see my father's jaw tighten, his fists clenching at his sides. He stepped closer. Don't walk out like this. We're just trying to build something. You already did, I said, my hand tightening around the handle of my suitcase. You built a hierarchy, and I just stopped trying to climb it. I turned toward the door. Behind me, voices rose, desperate, angry, pleading all at once. Words like regret, forgiveness, family. They chased me down the hallway, clung to my shoulders as I pulled on my coat, but none of them mattered anymore. The cold air hit me as I stepped outside. Crisp, sharp, honest in a way the voices behind me had never been. My breath fogged in front of me as I walked to the car. The house loomed behind me, its peeling paint and sagging gutters more visible now than they had been in the mist of morning. For a moment, I paused, my hand on the car door. Memories flickered in quick succession. The socks on my 10th birthday, the laughter at my expense during Thanksgiving dinners, the empty chair at graduations, the countless nights of being overlooked. I thought of the girl I had been, sitting quietly at this table year after year, hoping for recognition that never came. I whispered into the cold air just for her. We're done. The engine hummed to life beneath my hands. Headlights cut across the driveway. As I pulled onto the street, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Calls, messages, their names lighting up the screen one after another. Words like selfish, cold, ungrateful. I ignored them. Miles later, at a gas station just across the state line, I sat in the driver's seat scrolling through the messages. They blurred together, all variations of the same accusation. I blocked them one by one until silence returned to the screen, all except one number. My cousin Clara, the only one who had ever reached out with kindness, who had called me quietly on birthdays when no one else remembered. Her message was short, "Are you okay?" For the first time that night, I felt a smile tug at my lips. I typed back. I already am. When I finally returned to my apartment in Chicago, the city welcomed me with its familiar hum. I poured a glass of wine, stood by the wide windows, and watched the skyline blink like a heartbeat. In the glass reflection, I saw myself, not invisible, not forgotten, not lesser. Just me. Whole. I whispered again, more firmly this time, the words that had become both mantra and promise. I'm done. And with that, peace settled over me, soft and steady, a peace I had built with my own 2 hands. When I closed the door to my apartment behind me, the silence wrapped around me like a blanket. Chicago was never truly quiet. Sirens called from the distance, footsteps echoed faintly through the hallway outside, and the constant hum of the city pressed itself against the glass of my windows. Yet compared to the storm I had left behind, this silence was sacred. I rested my forehead against the door for a moment, breathing slowly. My chest rose and fell as if I were relearning how to inhale peace. For hours I had kept myself rigid, refusing to crack in front of them. Now, in my own home, my body sagged with exhaustion. My suitcase was still half open by the entrance, clothes spilling out carelessly. I left it there. I poured water into a glass, then changed my mind and uncorked a bottle of red wine instead. The first sip warmed my throat. I carried the glass to the window and looked out at the skyline. The city lights blinked like constellations scattered across black velvet. Cars streamed along the streets, their headlights weaving through the darkness like veins of light through a living body. Somewhere below, laughter rose from a passing couple. None of these lives belonged to me, and that was the comfort. Here I was not the forgotten daughter. I was simply another soul among millions. The phone buzzed on the counter. I ignored it. I already knew what the screen would show. Accusations, pleas, words hurled like stones, selfish, cold, ungrateful. For years they had been experts at silence, but when forced to speak, their vocabulary was small. I finished the wine and poured more. My apartment smelled faintly of lavender and coffee grounds. Every detail here was mine, earned by hours of work, chosen because I wanted it, not because someone else decided for me. Still, memories pushed their way back in. I was 12, standing at the edge of the living room on Christmas morning. Wrapping paper flew like confetti. Luca tore open box after box, each gift bigger and brighter than the last. A console, a jacket, a pile of video games. When the gifts dwindled, I waited for someone to hand me something. Anything. But there was nothing. My mother had clapped her hands and said, "We forgot again. You know how busy the holidays get." Luca laughed. He laughed the same way this year. Just like the good old days. I had promised myself then that I would stop waiting, but promises are difficult when you are 12. The ache of being overlooked still cut deep. The glass emptied quickly. I refilled it, setting the bottle down too hard on the counter. The sound startled me. I moved to the couch and curled my legs beneath me. The phone buzzed again. I picked it up this time. Dozens of messages lit the screen. "You should not have spoken to us that way. We were only asking for help. Money has changed you. Family is forever." Each accusation slid off me like rain against glass. They no longer pierced. I blocked each number one by one, steady and calm, until the screen was clean. All except Clara. Her message was short. "Are you okay?" A warmth spread through me that no wine could match. Clara had never laughed at me during dinners. She had slipped me notes of encouragement beneath the tablecloth. She had hugged me tight at my graduation, holding me as if she could keep me from breaking. I typed back, "I will be, I already am." I set the phone down, lighter than before. Memory stirred again. 19 years old, standing in the lobby of a hotel, the smell of bleach clinging to my uniform. My hands ached from scrubbing, my knees were sore from hours on hard tile. 3 essays waited to be written, a shift that would end at midnight, and a midterm waited for me in the morning. That semester I had called home once, not for money but for comfort. My mother answered with background noise in her voice. "Rose, I am busy, make it quick." I swallowed hard. "I just wanted to hear you." A sigh. "You will be fine, you always are." Then the line had gone dead. I had stood in the lobby smaller than ever, but I had tied my apron tighter and returned to work, because no one else was going to carry me. The skyline outside pulsed, unmoved by memory. I pressed my forehead to the glass. Tonight, for the first time, I had spoken aloud what I had always known. No, the word had landed like a stone, unmovable. For once I had not bent. Would they forgive me? Perhaps. But forgiveness was not what I needed from them. I needed it from myself. I whispered into the quiet. "I forgive you, Rose, for waiting so long, for hoping too much, for begging to be seen by people who never looked." The words surprised me, but once spoken, they softened something in me. Later, I crawled into bed, the city humming outside. I imagined the future, not the version they wanted, tethered to Luca's ambition, but my own. I saw projects I would lead, systems I would build, a life I would design piece by piece. I imagined laughter in this apartment, friends gathered around, maybe someone who loved me not for what I could give but for who I was. For the first time in years, the future felt wide instead of suffocating. Sleep pulled at me, but before surrendering, I whispered one last promise into the dark. "I am done being invisible. I am done begging for a seat at their table. From now on, I will build my own." The words echoed softly in the quiet, and for the first time, I believed them. Morning came slowly, a pale wash of light spreading across my bedroom wall. For a long time, I lay still beneath the blankets, listening to the hum of the radiator and the distant shuffle of footsteps in the hallway outside. The silence of this apartment felt different from the silence I had grown up with. That silence had been heavy, suffocating, a reminder that my words were unwelcome. This silence was light. It was mine. I sat up and reached for the mug I had left on the nightstand. The coffee had gone cold, but I sipped it anyway. The bitterness grounded me. My body ached from the long drive, but more than that, it ached from the weight of memories that clung to me. Leaving the house had not erased them. If anything, the distance had brought them closer, forcing me to face them without the noise of other people's voices drowning them out. I padded barefoot across the wooden floor to the window. Outside, Chicago was waking. Cars crawled along slick streets, their headlights glowing against patches of snow. Steam rose from manholes, blurring the figures of people hurrying to work. The city moved forward, indifferent to the storm inside me. That indifference was strangely comforting. I poured fresh coffee, added a touch of cream, and carried it back to the couch. The warmth seeped into my hands. I curled up beneath a blanket and stared out at the falling snow. It should have been peaceful, but silence has always carried ghosts. I was 11, sitting at the kitchen table, coloring quietly while my mother cooked. The smell of onions and garlic filled the air. Luca burst in through the back door, his voice booming, his face flushed with victory. He had scored 3 goals in a soccer match. My father followed, clapping him on the shoulder, his laughter filling the room. My mother turned from the stove, her face glowing with pride. I waited for a pause, for someone to notice the paper in front of me. a drawing of our house carefully shaded, every detail attended to. But the moment never came. My father opened a soda and raised it to Luca. My mother served him a plate of food. I sat silently, pressing my crayon harder against the paper until it snapped in my hand. No one noticed that either. That night, I slid the drawing beneath my pillow. I told myself it was safer there than on the fridge, where no one would look anyway. I shook the memory away and forced my focus to the present. Work emails filled my laptop screen, a neat queue of tasks waiting for me. I typed out responses, my tone professional and efficient. My colleagues saw me as reliable, competent, someone who delivered. They did not know that part of the reason I worked so hard was because silence had once been my constant companion. I had learned to fill it with achievement, to speak in the language of results because my words alone had never been enough. Yet even as I typed, more memories seeped in. I was 14, sitting in the bleachers of the school gym. Luca was playing basketball, the crowd roaring with every point. My parents sat in the front row, clapping and cheering, their faces lit with pride. I sat alone, my science fair ribbon folded in my backpack. That morning I had won first place in the regional competition. I had imagined walking into the gym and telling them, imagined their surprise, their delight. But when the game ended, the crowd swarmed Luca, and my parents rushed to congratulate him. I stayed seated, the ribbon burning in my pocket. When we got home, I slipped it into the same drawer where my certificates and report cards gathered dust. A private museum of recognition no one else wanted to visit. Back in the apartment, I rubbed my hands over my face. These memories came uninvited, but I no longer tried to push them away. They were part of me. Denying them only gave them more power. I closed the laptop and let myself breathe. The snow outside had thickened, blurring the skyline. The city looked softer, gentler, as if it were giving me permission to rest. I whispered to the glass, my breath fogging the surface. You were never invisible. They just refused to see. The words lingered in the air. For the first time, I believed them. Afternoon crept in, the light fading early as winter always demanded. I wrapped the blanket tighter around myself and let my mind wander. I thought about college, about nights when I cleaned hotel rooms until my body ached, then stayed up until dawn coding in the library. I remembered eating instant noodles while listening to lectures online, my headphones crackling, my eyes burning with fatigue. I had not done it because I loved suffering. I had done it because I needed to build something no one could take away. I needed proof, not for them, but for myself, that I was capable, and I had built it. Every paycheck, every project, every late night had led me here, to this apartment, to this career, to this freedom. Yet freedom did not erase longing. There were nights when I wished someone had cheered for me in a crowded gym, or asked about my day, or noticed the certificate I had placed so carefully on the counter. There were nights when I still wanted to call my mother and hear her voice filled with pride instead of distraction. But those nights were fewer now. Each day I grew stronger in the realization that I did not need their recognition to be whole. Evening arrived. I lit a candle on the coffee table, its glow flickering against the walls. The snow outside had quieted the city, muffling even the usual horns and sirens. I sat with my journal, pen poised above the page. For years I had written silently, never showing anyone the words. Tonight I wrote to the girl I had been. You were not wrong to want to be seen. You were not wrong to hope. But you are more than their blindness. You are more than their neglect. You have always been enough. Tears blurred the page, but I kept writing. Line after line poured out, years of silence breaking open into ink. When I finally set the pen down, my chest felt lighter. Before bed, I stood once more by the window. The city glittered, resilient beneath its blanket of snow. I touched the glass and whispered, I am done with their silence. I choose my own now. And with that, I turned off the light and let sleep take me, not as escape but as rest. The next day arrived without ceremony. I woke before dawn, not because of an alarm, but because my body had grown used to early hours. Old habits from college, when I balanced 2 jobs with classes, still clung to me. I sat up slowly, the apartment dark around me. For a moment, I listened to the radiator clicking in the corner and the faint whir of the refrigerator. Silence wrapped itself around me. I brewed coffee, the smell rising warm and rich. As it filled the room, I let my mind wander, knowing it would drift toward the same places. Memory was no longer something I could control. It came when it wanted, often in the quiet hours of morning. I was 16, walking home from school. My backpack was heavy with books. Snow fell in soft sheets, covering the sidewalk. Luca drove past in a car my parents had bought him for his birthday. Music blasted from his speakers. He waved casually before speeding off. I trudged through the snow, my boots soaked, my fingers numb. That evening, my parents praised him for being responsible with the car. I sat silently at the table, the wet hem of my jeans sticking cold against my skin. No one asked how I had gotten home. Later that night, I wrote in my journal, "One day I will drive my own car, bought with my own money, and no one will be able to take it away." The coffee steamed in my mug as I sat at my desk. My laptop glowed, the cursor blinking on a blank page. I tried to focus on the project due at the end of the week, but the silence pressed closer. I remembered college again, nights when I worked in the library until it closed, then walked home through streets slick with ice. Nights when I typed code until my fingers cramped, whispering lines of logic under my breath because there was no one else to listen. Nights when hunger gnawed at me and I chose textbooks over meals. And through it all, the silence from home. Weeks passed without a single call. When I reached out, the responses were clipped, distracted. "We are busy. You will be fine. You always are." I told myself I did not need them. I told myself I was stronger alone. But deep down, I still wished for a voice on the other end of the line telling me they were proud. I stood and stretched, pacing the apartment. The city was beginning to wake outside, lights flicking on in neighboring windows. I pressed my palm to the cold glass and watched people hurry along the sidewalks, bundled against the wind. Each of them carried stories I would never know, yet I felt connected to them, strangers who owed me nothing and therefore could never disappoint me. Silence hummed around me, but I began to see it differently. Not as punishment, not as neglect, but as possibility. In silence, I could hear my own voice clearly. Another memory rose, sharper than the rest. I was 21, standing at a podium in a lecture hall. I had been chosen to present a project at a regional conference. My hands trembled as I clicked through the slides, but my voice was steady. The professors applauded. A recruiter slipped me a business card afterward. It was the first time I felt seen outside the walls of my family home. That night, I called my parents, eager to share the news. My mother answered. "I was selected to present," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, though my heart pounded. "That is nice," she replied. "Luca has been very busy with work. Did you hear he might get a promotion?" The silence that followed was heavier than any applause I had received. Back in the apartment, I laughed softly to myself, though there was no humor in it. For years, I had chased a kind of recognition they were unwilling to give, but recognition had come from elsewhere. From professors, from colleagues, from strangers who saw my work for what it was. I picked up my pen and opened my journal again. Their silence shaped me, but it does not define me. I am more than the words they never said. I am the life I built in the absence of their voices. I wrote until my hand ached, until the page was filled. By evening, snow was falling again, blanketing the city in white. I turned off the lights and stood by the window, the glow of the skyline reflecting on the glass. I thought about the girl I had been, the young woman I had become, and the woman I was still shaping myself to be. Silence had once been my enemy. Now I claimed it as mine. I whispered into the night. I will not let their absence echo louder than my presence. And in that moment, with the city quiet beneath the snow, I believed it. The storm did not arrive all at once. It began as a whisper, a faint vibration at the edges of my carefully built piece. At first it was easy to ignore, a message left unread, a call declined, an envelope pushed to the bottom of the mail pile. But storms rarely stay whispers. They gather, they swell, and soon the air thickens with their weight. I had returned to work with the determination of someone who needed distraction. My company was preparing for the launch of a new system I had helped design. Deadlines were stacked one atop another. Colleagues filled my inbox with questions. Meetings stretched late into the evening. It should have been overwhelming, but I welcomed it. Every line of code, every spreadsheet, every late-night video call pulled me further away from the echo of my family's voices. Yet even in the office, silence carried its ghosts. When I sat at my desk and stared at the glowing screen, memories crept in like drafts through cracked windows. I remembered the Christmas table, the voices rising in unison to praise Luca, the way my refusal had landed like a stone. I remembered the messages that followed, words designed to pierce, words that failed to move me. And I remembered Clara's text, the single lifeline among the flood. It was a Tuesday morning when the first letter arrived. The envelope sat in my mailbox, cream-colored, my name written in my father's unmistakable script. I carried it upstairs, turning it over in my hands as if the weight of the paper could tell me what was inside. I left it unopened on the counter while I brewed coffee. Steam rose from the mug, curling into the air, but my eyes kept returning to the envelope. Finally, I tore it open. The letter was brief. My father's handwriting was neat, controlled, each line carefully measured. He asked me to reconsider. He reminded me of the family name, of loyalty, of tradition. He wrote that Luca's project was not only for himself but for all of us. That success would raise us all. At the bottom, in smaller letters, he wrote, "Do not let pride make you cruel." I folded the letter once, then again, until it was a small square of paper. I dropped it into the trash. The sound it made against the empty bin was softer than I expected. 2 days later, another envelope arrived. This time from my mother. Her handwriting looped across the page in hurried strokes. She told me she missed me. She told me she wanted us to be close again. She said families fight, but they always come back together. She ended with a line that stung more than I wanted to admit. "You know deep down that we love you." I set the letter on the counter and stared at it for a long time. Love, I thought, had never felt like silence. Love had never felt like absence. Love had never felt like handing me scraps while showering Luca with abundance. If this was their version of love, it was not one I wanted to return to. The letters kept coming. Each one a new attempt, a new strategy. My father wrote about responsibility. My mother wrote about forgiveness. Even Luca sent a note, though his words were sharp, calling me bitter, jealous, ungrateful. I stacked the letters in a drawer, unopened after the first few. The drawer grew heavy with their weight. At night I dreamed of storms, thunder rolling through endless skies, rain hammering against windows, winds tearing through streets. I woke with the taste of lightning in my mouth. The storm pressed closer at work as well. One afternoon, my manager pulled me aside. "Rose, I received a strange email. Someone claiming to be a relative of yours reached out to the company, suggesting we look into your financial history. It was poorly written, but still, we had to take it seriously." My stomach dropped. What did it say? He sighed, "That you had misused funds, that your success was built on dishonesty. We know it is nonsense. Your record is spotless, but it is concerning that someone would go to these lengths." I thanked him, my voice steady, though my hands trembled at my sides. When I returned to my desk, I sat for a long time staring at the screen, my reflection faint in the glass. The storm was no longer a whisper. It had found its way into the spaces I thought were safe. That evening, I called Clara. Her voice was soft on the other end of the line. "They are desperate," she said. "They do not know how to accept your no, so they are trying to force you. I wish I could shield you from it." "You already do," I said, "just by listening." We spoke for hours, our voices weaving together across the distance. She told me about her own small rebellions, the ways she had resisted being swallowed by the family's expectations. For the first time, I realized I was not entirely alone. Still, the storm gathered. Anonymous numbers began calling my phone. Messages appeared in my inbox, some pleading, some threatening. My father wrote again, this time invoking the sacrifices he and my mother had made. He wrote of sleepless nights, of bills paid, of food placed on the table. He asked how I could be so cold. I wanted to write back and tell him that food is not love if it is given with resentment. That shelter is not safety if it comes with silence. That sacrifices made only for one child are not sacrifices at all. But I did not write. I let the silence speak for me. The silence became its own shield. Each letter unanswered, each call declined, each message left unread was a brick in the wall I was building. But walls do not stop storms. They only delay them. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning. I walked into the cafe down the street, craving the comfort of coffee not brewed by my own hands. As I waited in line, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned and froze. My father stood there, his coat dusted with snow, his eyes fixed on mine. "Rose," he said, his voice low, urgent, "we need to talk." The cafe spun around me, the clatter of cups, the hiss of steam, the murmur of voices blending into a dull roar. I wanted to turn and run, but my feet stayed rooted. "There is nothing to say," I managed. "There is everything to say," he insisted. "You cannot shut us out forever." I shook my head. "I am not shutting you out, I am choosing myself." His jaw tightened. "This is not you, they have poisoned you against us. That city, those people, they have filled your head with lies." I laughed, though it sounded hollow even to me. "No one had to poison me. I lived in that house, I remember." For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes, doubt maybe, or guilt, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "You will regret this," he said, and turned away. I stood in line, my heart hammering, the storm raging louder than ever. That night, I sat by the window with a glass of wine, watching snow blur the city lights. My father's words echoed in my head. "You will regret this." Perhaps he was right. Perhaps there would be nights when I longed for reconciliation, when loneliness pressed too heavily against my chest. But regret was a small price compared to the cost of erasing myself again. I opened my journal and wrote, "They believe silence is weakness. They do not see that silence has made me strong. I will not speak the words they want. I will not bend to their storm. I am the storm now. The pen moved faster, spilling out lines I had never dared to write before. Memories tumbled onto the page, not as weights but as fuel. Every forgotten birthday, every overlooked achievement, every careless word became part of the fire that kept me moving. By the time I set the pen down, the storm outside had calmed. Snow drifted gently, the city hushed. Inside me, the storm had found form. Not chaos, but clarity. I realized then that storms are not only forces of destruction, they are also forces of renewal. They clear the air, strip away what is rot, make space for what is new. My family's storm was meant to break me, but instead it had shown me what I could withstand. The next morning, I rose with a steadiness I had not felt in weeks. I brewed coffee, dressed, and walked into the city with my head high. The air was cold, the sky pale, but the weight on my chest had lifted. I knew the storm was not over. I knew there would be more letters, more encounters, more attempts to pull me back into their orbit. But I also knew something else, something truer than all their words. I was no longer the girl waiting at the table for someone to notice her. I was no longer the student hiding certificates in drawers. I was no longer the daughter who mistook silence for love. I was Rose Romero. And I had survived the storm. The days after seeing my father at the cafe blurred together in a haze of restless energy. I worked longer hours than usual, arriving early and staying late, filling my time with meetings and reports so that I would not have to sit alone with my thoughts. Yet the storm followed me everywhere. It crept into my inbox, into the silence between phone calls, into the restless dreams that visited me at night. One evening, after a 12-hour day, I returned to my apartment to find an envelope slid under the door. The sight made my stomach clench. I picked it up and held it under the light. The handwriting was Luca's. I opened it and read quickly. His words were sharp, scrawled as if in anger. He accused me of betrayal, of turning my back on blood, of letting outsiders poison me. He called me selfish. He said that without the family, I was nothing. At the end he wrote, "When everything collapses, do not expect us to be there." I read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer with the others. The drawer was nearly full now, heavy with paper and ink, each one a piece of the storm pressing against my walls. That night I could not sleep. I sat at the window watching the city, my reflection faint in the glass. The silence pressed close, but it no longer felt suffocating. It felt alive, charged with something I could not name. I thought about the girl I had been, the woman I was becoming, and the line that separated them. I picked up my journal and began to write. They believe I am alone. They do not see that in solitude I have found strength. They believe silence is punishment. They do not see that silence is my sanctuary. They believe I will crumble. They do not see that I have already rebuilt myself from the ruins they left behind. The words flowed easily, filling page after page. By the time I set the pen down, dawn was breaking. At work, my exhaustion did not go unnoticed. A colleague named Henry stopped by my desk. "You look like you have been carrying the weight of the world," he said lightly. I managed a smile. "Just busy." He studied me for a moment, then said, "If you ever need someone to talk to, you know where to find me." The offer was simple, but it stirred something in me. Not pity, not obligation, but genuine concern. It reminded me that not everyone vanished into silence. Some people showed up without being asked. That evening, Clara called. Her voice was warm, steady. "I heard they confronted you in the city," she said. I told her about the cafe, about the letters, about the exhaustion that clung to me. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "You are not wrong to stand your ground. You are not cruel for protecting yourself. Remember that." Her words settled into me like stones in the foundation I was building. I held on to them tightly. The storm outside continued. More letters arrived. More messages buzzed through my phone before I blocked the numbers. But inside, something shifted. I no longer felt like I was waiting for the storm to pass. I felt like I was learning to walk through it. One night, as snow fell heavily outside, I wrote again in my journal, "I am not their silence anymore. I am my own voice, and I will not be drowned out." The candle flickered on the table, the city glowed beneath its blanket of snow, and for the first time since the storm began, I felt something close to peace. The storm carried me into the following weeks, but something within me had shifted. Instead of shrinking under the weight of their persistence, I found myself beginning to resist it with a new kind of strength. At first, it surprised me. Then it steadied me. I returned to work one Monday morning, snow crunching beneath my boots as I crossed the street to the office. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, familiar and grounding. I rode the elevator up with strangers, each lost in their own worlds, and I thought of how liberating it was that no one here cared about my family name. To them, I was simply Rose Romero, a systems architect, a colleague, a woman who showed up and did her work. Nothing more, nothing less. But even at the office, I could not escape the sense that something larger was building. My manager called me into her office later that day. Her face was calm, but her eyes searched mine carefully. "Rose, I need to tell you something," she began. "We've received another anonymous inquiry. Someone is trying to suggest you are not who you claim to be." I clenched my fists in my lap. "What did they say this time?" She hesitated before answering. "That your records are falsified, that your degree was bought, that you fabricated your achievements." For a moment the room tilted. All those years of sleepless nights, of cleaning hotel bathrooms until my knees ached, of coding and freezing libraries until dawn, dismissed in a few sentences of malice. My manager leaned forward. "We know it is false. Your record speaks for itself. But Rose, this cannot continue unchecked. Whoever is behind this, they want to harm you." I swallowed hard. "I know who it is." She studied me, but I offered nothing more. That night I walked home slowly, the city lights swimming in the slush of melting snow. I thought about the storm and about how it had seeped into every corner of my life. I thought about the letters piling in my drawer, the words carved into my skin even when I refused to read them. I thought about my father's voice in the cafe, accusing me of being poisoned by the world outside their walls. The truth was clear now. They were not going to stop. Not until I either gave in or broke completely. I made myself tea and sat by the window, journal open, pen in hand. The candle burned low on the table, shadows flickering against the walls. They want me to doubt myself. They want me to forget who I am, but I remember. I remember every sleepless night, every exam I passed, every shift I worked, every system I built. I remember the weight of silence, and I remember how I turned it into strength. They cannot erase me, not anymore. As the ink dried, I felt clarity settle into me. This was the turning point. I could no longer simply defend myself. I had to choose how I would live going forward, not in reaction to them, but in defiance of them. The next morning, I cleared the drawer of letters. I stacked them neatly, tied them with string, and placed them in a box, not as a shrine, but as evidence. Proof of what I had endured, proof of what I would not return to. I slid the box under my bed and closed the drawer on the empty space. For the first time in months, the apartment felt lighter. Clara called that evening. Her voice carried warmth, though I could hear the worry beneath it. "I know they will not stop," she said, "but you do not have to face them alone. Promise me you will not carry this by yourself." I hesitated, then answered softly, "I promise." After the call ended, I stood at the window again. Snow was falling in steady flakes, the city glowing beneath it. My reflection stared back at me, eyes tired but alive. "I will not break," I whispered. "Not now, not ever." And the words felt true. The weeks that followed felt different, as if something inside me had hardened into steel. I still received the letters, though less frequently now. Perhaps they had grown tired, or perhaps they were changing tactics. The silence between the waves of contact was its own kind of tension, like the air before a storm. I knew better than to believe it was over. At work, my focus sharpened. The project I had been leading neared its final phase, and every day demanded precision. My colleagues began to look at me with something like admiration. I caught Henry watching me in meetings, his expression thoughtful, as if he were trying to understand how I held myself so steady. If only he knew the storm I carried inside. One night after a particularly long day, I stopped by the cafe near my apartment. The barista knew me by now, greeting me with a smile that felt more genuine than anything I had seen at the Christmas table. I ordered a cappuccino and sat by the window, notebook open. Writing had become ritual, a way to keep myself grounded. They want me small. They want me silent. They want me to believe that without them I am nothing. But I have already lived without them, and I am still here. I am stronger here than I ever was in that house. The words poured out quickly, and when I closed the notebook, I felt lighter. When I left the cafe, the night air was sharp, biting against my skin. Snow crunched beneath my boots, and then I saw him. Lucas stood across the street, leaning against a lamppost. His coat collar was turned up, his breath a faint mist in the cold. Our eyes met, and for a moment the world seemed to narrow to the space between us. He did not move. Neither did I. Finally, he pushed away from the lamppost and crossed the street. "Rose," he said, his voice low. I tightened my grip on my bag. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for you." His eyes flicked over me, assessing. "You will not answer our calls, you will not read our letters, so I came." I felt my pulse quicken. "You should not have." He stepped closer, his expression sharp. "Do you think this ends with you saying no? Do you think you can just walk away from us?" I held his gaze, refusing to flinch. "Yes, that is exactly what I think." For a moment, he looked startled, then he laughed softly, shaking his head. "You are more stubborn than I remembered. Or maybe I am simply done being afraid." His smile faded. He leaned in slightly, his words a whisper meant only for me. "You cannot fight blood, Rose. Sooner or later, it pulls you back." I stepped back. "Not if I cut the cord." The silence between us stretched, heavy and electric. Then he straightened, shoving his hands into his pockets. "We will see," he said, and turned away. I stood in the cold long after he was gone, my breath clouding the air, my heart pounding. When I finally returned to my apartment, I wrote in my journal again. "He thinks blood is unbreakable. He does not understand that family is not chains, it is choice, and I have made mine." I closed the notebook and placed it on the nightstand. The candle flickered, throwing soft light across the room. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the storm shift around me. For the first time, I did not feel like its victim. I felt like its center. The silence after Luca's sudden appearance lingered for days. I carried it with me like a weight, heavy but invisible. His words echoed at odd times. "You cannot fight blood. Sooner or later, it pulls you back." I had heard variations of that sentence my entire life, but something about the way he had said it that night chilled me. It was not a plea. It was a promise. At work, I forced myself into routines. Meetings, presentations, late hours hunched over my laptop. I told myself if I filled my days with enough tasks, the nights would not press so hard. Yet every evening when I returned to my apartment, I found myself pausing at the door, listening for footsteps in the hallway, for the sound of paper sliding beneath the frame. Sometimes there was nothing. Sometimes there was another envelope waiting. One Thursday evening, I found a small package instead. My name was written across the top in familiar looping script. I carried it inside carefully, setting it on the counter as though it might explode. For several minutes I stood staring at it, debating. Finally, I opened it. Inside was a photo album. The kind my mother used to keep on the living room shelf, filled with snapshots of birthdays, vacations, school plays. I flipped through slowly. There was Luca at 5, his hair messy, frosting on his cheek. Luca at 10, holding a soccer trophy almost as tall as he was. My parents on either side, their faces glowing with pride. Page after page, Luca filled the frames, smiling, laughing, celebrated. I kept turning, waiting to see myself. At last, near the back, I found a single photo. I was maybe 8, standing at the edge of the frame, half cropped out. My smile was small, hesitant, as if I had been caught off guard. No one's arms were around me. No one was looking my way. On the inside of the back cover, a note was taped. "See how much we included you? Stop saying we forgot." I closed the album and felt my hands tremble. Inclusion, to them, was being allowed at the edges. Inclusion was a single photo out of dozens. Inclusion was proof enough in their minds that I had no right to complain. I placed the album back in the box, taped it shut, and slid it under the bed with the letters. The drawer beneath the bed was beginning to look like a museum of denial. That night, I dreamed of standing in the middle of a crowded room. Everyone else faced away from me, their backs turned, their voices loud with laughter. I shouted until my throat burned, but no one turned. Then, in the dream, I stopped shouting. I stood in silence, and slowly the room fell quiet too. One by one, heads turned toward me, not because I had demanded it, but because I had refused to be drowned out. I woke with the sheets tangled around me, my heart racing. The next morning, Clara called. Her voice was steady but concerned. "I think you should know something," she said. "They are not only writing to you, they have started talking to others. Neighbors, old friends, anyone who will listen. They are telling people you are unstable, that your success has gone to your head, that you have turned against the family." I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Of course they are." "I do not believe them," Clara said quickly. "But you need to be careful. Rumors can travel faster than truth." Her warning echoed in my mind long after the call ended. The storm was shifting again, changing shape. It was no longer only directed at me. It was reaching outward, trying to infect the world around me. That evening, I wrote in my journal. They rewrite history to suit themselves. They erase me from photo albums, then accuse me of lying when I say I was forgotten. They spread stories to anyone who will listen, hoping repetition will make them true. But truth is not theirs to command. I carry it inside me. I carry it in every sleepless night, in every exam passed alone, in every moment I chose to keep going when they would not look my way. They cannot take that from me. I set down the pen and stared at the candle's flickering flame. The air felt charged, heavy with something unspoken. I knew a revelation was coming. I could feel it pressing at the edges of the storm, waiting to break through. The package with the photo album marked a shift. It was not only an attempt to guilt me, it was a message. They were willing to manipulate even the past to break me. The realization stung, but it also clarified something deep inside me. If they could twist memories, then nothing was sacred to them. Not the truth, not me, not even the fragments of childhood that I had tried to preserve in my own mind. Days later, another package appeared. This one heavier, wrapped in plain brown paper. I carried it inside with dread curling in my stomach. When I unwrapped it, I found stacks of old report cards, certificates, and essays. They were mine, the very papers I had tucked away in drawers over the years. Somehow they had found them, dug them out, and sent them back to me. A note was placed on top in my mother's writing. "We always kept your things. See how much we valued you? You are wrong to say we did not care." I sat at the kitchen table staring at the papers. Straight A's across subjects, teachers, comments praising my work ethic and potential, awards for competitions I had quietly celebrated alone. And all of it returned now, years later, as if evidence could undo the silence that had surrounded those moments. I touched one report card, remembering the night I had left it on the counter, waiting for someone to notice. They never had. And now they wanted credit for keeping it hidden in a box. I laughed bitterly and pushed the pile away. That night I barely slept. My dreams were filled with images of papers scattering in the wind, blowing out of my hands while voices whispered accusations. When I woke, the sheets were damp with sweat, my throat raw as if I had been shouting. I dragged myself to work, exhausted. But when I sat at my desk, something shifted. I thought about those report cards, those essays, those awards. They were proof of me, proof that I had existed, that I had worked, that I had achieved. Even if no one had celebrated them then, they were real. No amount of manipulation could erase that. During lunch, I walked to the park across the street. The air was sharp with cold, my breath visible in the air. I sat on a bench, notebook in hand, and began to write. They kept the evidence, but they did not keep me. They tried to bury me in silence, but my work endured. They want to claim now that they valued me, but value without recognition is neglect in disguise. I see it clearly now. They were not blind. They chose not to look. The words spilled out until my hand cramped. When I finished, I closed the notebook and held it against my chest. That evening, Clara called again. Her tone was hesitant. "Rose, I think there is something you need to know. I overheard a conversation between my mother and yours. They were talking about you, about money. They said the only reason they are fighting so hard is because they think you owe them." I frowned. "Owe them?" "Yes. They believe your success belongs to them somehow. That if they had not put a roof over your head, fed you, clothed you, you would not be where you are. They think your achievements are a debt, and now they are collecting." The words hit me like a physical blow. All those years of silence, all those years of absence, and now they wanted to rewrite it as sacrifice, as investment. As if my life were something they had purchased and now held receipts for. I thanked Clara and ended the call, my hands trembling. Then I opened my journal again. So this is the truth. They do not want me. They want what I represent. They want to turn my years of struggle into their profit. They want to call neglect generosity, silence love, absence sacrifice, but I know better. I lived it. I paid the price. I will not pay again. When I put the pen down, I felt a strange calm wash over me. The storm was still raging, but at its center, I found stillness. The revelation had cut through the noise. I finally understood what their battle was about. It had never been about love. It had never been about family. It had always been about control, and knowing that gave me power. I blew out the candle, closed my eyes, and whispered into the dark. You cannot collect what you never gave. The revelation about debt gnawed at me. It replayed in my mind during meetings, on walks through the snow, in the quiet of my apartment. Every time I thought about their words, about my life being treated like an investment they were entitled to collect from, I felt heat rising in my chest. Anger mixed with disbelief until it was almost unbearable. I had survived years of silence, of being overlooked, of absence disguised as normalcy. But this was different. This was theft dressed up as obligation. They wanted to rewrite the past, to transform neglect into sacrifice and my independence into their victory. It was a lie so enormous that it threatened to crush me if I let it. Work gave me some relief. The project I led reached its final stage. Late nights and early mornings kept me occupied, and the adrenaline of progress dulled the sting of betrayal. But even in the hum of the office, I carried the storm. Every time I opened my inbox, I half expected another anonymous accusation. Every time my phone buzzed, I braced for a new attempt to pull me back. One night after a long meeting, I returned to my apartment to find Clara waiting outside my door. Her coat was dusted with snow, her hands shoved deep into her pockets. She looked up when I approached, her expression tight with worry. "Clara," I said, surprised, "what are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," she said. Her voice trembled slightly. "Things are getting worse." I unlocked the door and let her inside. She sat on the couch while I poured tea for both of us. When I handed her the cup, she gripped it with both hands as if steadying herself. "They are planning something," she said finally. "I overheard my father talking to yours. They were discussing lawyers, contracts. They believe they can force you legally. They think you owe them because they supported you until you left for college." I stared at her, the words sinking like stones. "They cannot do that." "They think they can. They are desperate, Rose. They are not going to stop." I sat down heavily, the mug warm in my hands. For years I had endured their silence. Now I was being forced to endure their voices, louder and more relentless than ever. But beneath the fear, a new clarity formed. If they wanted a fight, I would give them one. The breaking point had arrived. The following week was a blur of tension. More letters came, some pleading, others threatening. I ignored them all. At work, I buried myself in tasks, though exhaustion tugged at me constantly. Clara checked in often, her calls a lifeline. Henry noticed the shadows under my eyes and offered quiet support, never pressing for details. Then, one evening, everything escalated. I returned home to find my apartment door ajar. My heart raced as I pushed it open. The lights were off, but I could tell immediately that something was wrong. Papers were scattered across the floor, drawers half open, the box of letters pulled from beneath my bed and left gaping. I stood frozen, the silence roaring in my ears. Someone had been here. Someone had crossed the line between words and action. I called the police, my voice shaking as I explained. They came, took notes, asked questions, but there was little they could do. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints they could use. When they left, the apartment felt emptier than before, stripped of its safety. I sat on the couch, staring at the mess, and felt something inside me snap. Fear gave way to anger, pure and sharp. They had turned silence into absence, absence into accusation, accusation into theft. Now they had invaded the one place that was mine. I picked up my journal and wrote furiously. "This is the end of patience. This is the end of waiting for them to stop. They have crossed into my world, and I will not forgive it. They believe they can break me. They believe blood gives them the right to destroy what I have built. But they are wrong. The breaking point is here, and it is not mine. It is theirs." When I set the pen down, my hand ached, but my resolve was firm. The storm had reached its peak. The air around me felt charged, heavy with the promise of change. I blew out the candle and whispered into the dark. "You cannot take me back, not now, not ever." And for the first time, I felt not just defiance, but power. The break-in changed everything. Until then, the battle had been waged in words, whispers, and shadows. Now it was physical, undeniable. Someone had stepped into my home, touched my things, searched through the pieces of my life. The thought haunted me as I cleaned the mess, shoving the letters back into their box, pushing the furniture into place. No amount of rearranging could restore the sense of safety that had been taken from me. The next morning, I walked to work with a hollow feeling in my chest. Every sound made me flinch: the hiss of a bus's brakes, the shuffle of footsteps behind me, the ringing of a stranger's phone. My nerves were frayed, stretched taut. At the office, Henry caught me staring blankly at my screen. "You are not all right," he said gently. I shook my head. "No, but I will be." He hesitated, then placed a hand on the back of my chair. "Whatever this is, you do not have to go through it alone. I mean that." Something in his tone cut through the storm for a moment. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. That evening, Clara came over. She brought food, though neither of us ate much. We sat on the couch, mugs of tea growing cold between us. "They are escalating," she said quietly. "My father mentioned that your mother has been collecting stories, things to use against you. They are planning to confront you again, but this time it will not be a conversation. It will be war." I rubbed my temples, exhaustion pressing down on me. "I am so tired, Clara. Tired of fighting, tired of defending myself against lies, tired of waiting for the next blow." She touched my arm. "Then stop waiting. Fight back." Her words lingered long after she left. That night, I opened the box of letters and spread them across the floor. Each one a blade aimed at me, each one filled with accusations, guilt, manipulation. I read through them carefully, my anger building with every page. I began marking them with notes in the margins, contradictions, lies, moments where they revealed more than they meant to. By the time I finished, the floor was littered with evidence. I realized something then. They believed they were in control, that they were the storm pressing down on me, but they had left a trail. In their desperation, they had written the story themselves. All I had to do was make it visible. Over the next days, I gathered everything: the letters, the package with the photo album, the report cards, even the box that had been broken open during the intrusion. I documented everything carefully. The evidence was not just proof of harassment. It was proof of their obsession, their refusal to let me go, their attempt to rewrite the truth. When I finished, I felt lighter. For the first time, I was not reacting. I was preparing. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. One evening, as I left the office, I saw them waiting across the street. My father, Luca, and an uncle I barely recognized. They stood in a cluster, their faces shadowed under the streetlights. My chest tightened, but I forced my feet forward. They stepped into my path. My father spoke first. "Rose, we need to talk." I held my bag tightly. "You broke into my home." His expression flickered. "We only wanted to remind you of who you are." "That is not reminding," I said coldly. "That is trespassing." Luca's voice cut in. "You owe us, Rose. Do not pretend you do not. Everything you are, everything you have, came because of us." "No," I said firmly. "Everything I am came in spite of you." The words hung in the air like a strike. My father's eyes hardened. "Do not be ungrateful. Blood ties cannot be broken." "Blood ties are not chains," I said. My voice was steady now, my fear burned away by anger. "You had your chance to be my family. You chose silence. You chose absence. You do not get to rewrite that now." For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Luca stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "You think you are strong enough to stand against us?" I met his gaze. "I do not think it, I know it." The silence that followed was heavy, charged. I could feel the storm breaking around us, lightning in the air. They had pushed me to the edge, but instead of falling, I had found my ground. Finally, my father spoke again, his voice low. "This is not over." I lifted my chin. "Yes, it is." They stared at me for another moment before turning and walking away, their footsteps fading into the night. I stood there long after they were gone, my heart pounding, my breath visible in the cold. The storm had broken, and though I trembled, I was still standing. When I returned home, I wrote in my journal, "They believe they are the storm, but storms pass. And when they do, what remains is stronger than before. I am not theirs. I never was. I never will be." For the first time, I believed it fully. The night after they confronted me on the street, I could not sleep. My body felt wired, like every nerve had been lit with fire. I replayed their words in my head, every accusation, every attempt to frame my life as a debt. I stared at the ceiling for hours, the shadows shifting as headlights passed outside, until the sun began to bleed pale light through the curtains. By morning, I knew I could not keep living like this. I was tired of running, tired of bracing for impact, tired of waiting for the next attack. I needed to turn the storm back on them. I took the box of letters and the packages and laid them out across the table. Each piece of paper was another thread in the web they had woven around me. Taken alone, they looked like fragments of a family trying to reach out. But together, they formed a pattern: control, manipulation, threats, denial, escalation. They told the story better than I ever could. I called Clara first. She arrived within an hour, her face pale but determined. She sat beside me, flipping through the letters, shaking her head. "This is more than harassment," she said. "This is obsession." "I know," I rubbed my temples. "They think they can make me crumble. They think they can erase the truth, but I am done playing defense." Clara hesitated, then placed her hand over mine. "There is something you need to hear before you decide what to do. My mother told me something last night. Something about you." I frowned. "About me?" She nodded. "Rose, they are hiding something, something about your birth. My mother said you are not who you think you are." The room tilted. I pulled my hand back, my chest tightening. "What do you mean?" Clara swallowed. "She said your mother, your supposed mother, was not the one who gave birth to you, that you were taken in, not adopted formally, but absorbed into the family quietly. That is why they treat you the way they do. To them, you are both part of them and not. Blood, but not blood." The words struck me like thunder. My hands shook as I gripped the edge of the table. Memories flooded back, moments that had never made sense before. My mother's distant gaze, my father's coldness, the way Luca was always the golden child while I was an afterthought. Their silence had not just been neglect, it had been distance. I stood abruptly, pacing the room. So all this time I was fighting for a place that was never mine? Clara's eyes glistened with sympathy. "Rose, it does not change who you are. It does not erase what you have achieved. But it changed everything I thought I knew." I sat back down, staring at the letters, the packages, the photo album. The pieces shifted in my mind, rearranging themselves into a new pattern. They had not only been trying to control me, they had been trying to conceal the truth. "I need proof," I whispered. Clara nodded. "I will help you find it." The next days blurred into a mission. I combed through public records, old files, anything I could access. Clara spoke to relatives discreetly, piecing together stories. Slowly, the truth emerged. My mother had lost a child before Luca was born. Soon after, I appeared in the household. No one outside the family ever asked questions. Within the walls of that house, silence covered everything. The storm inside me grew darker, heavier. I had lived my entire life believing I was unloved because I was not enough. The truth was crueler. I was unloved because I did not fit their idea of blood. I was never meant to be seen. And yet, I had survived. On the 7th night of searching, I lit a candle, opened my journal, and wrote. The revelation is clear now. I was never theirs, not by blood, not by choice. I was a shadow brought into their house, expected to remain silent, but silence does not last. Silence cracks, silence speaks. They tried to erase me because I was the reminder of something they wanted to hide, but I endured. I built myself in the absence of their love, and now I will not hide. As the ink dried, I felt a new resolve harden inside me. The final confrontation was no longer about proving my worth. It was about exposing the truth. I closed the journal and whispered to the flame. You kept me silent once, never again. The revelation about my origins did not crush me the way my family might have hoped. Instead, it sharpened me. It was as if I had been walking in fog my whole life, stumbling against shapes I could not see, only to find the light switch at last. The pieces finally fit. Their indifference, their cruelty, their constant reminders that I did not belong, all of it was rooted in a truth they never intended me to discover. For days I felt hollow, my body moving on autopilot through meetings, commutes, late nights at my desk. But inside that hollow space, something grew. Not despair, not fear, clarity. If I was never theirs, then I owed them nothing. And if they had built their lies on my silence, then the surest way to dismantle them was to speak. Clara helped me prepare. Together, we organized the letters, the packages, the false narratives they had tried to impose on me. We built a record, not only of harassment, but of a pattern of erasure and control. I copied pages of my journal, the words that had carried me through nights of doubt, words that stood as testimony of survival. The day came sooner than I expected. My father called, his voice tight and commanding. We need to meet, all of us, tonight. I almost laughed at the audacity of it. After months of chasing, threatening, and breaking into my life, he thought he could summon me with a phone call. But I agreed. Not because I wanted reconciliation, because I wanted an ending. The meeting was set at the old family house. Walking up the path that evening, Clara by my side, I felt my chest constrict. The house loomed ahead, its windows glowing faintly, a place filled with ghosts of silence. My steps slowed, but Clara touched my arm. You are not alone anymore. Inside, they were waiting. My father, Luca, my mother, several aunts and uncles. Their faces were masks of tension, eyes sharp and expectant. The air smelled of dust and candle wax. My father spoke first. Rose, sit down. I remained standing. I will stand. He frowned but continued. We have tolerated your rebellion long enough. You have twisted the story of this family. You spread lies, you reject us, you act as if you are above us. It ends now. I felt heat rise in my chest, but my voice was steady. No. It ends when I say it ends. Murmurs rippled through the room. Luca leaned forward, his tone mocking. And what will you do, Rose? You cannot erase blood. I met his eyes. Maybe not, but you already did. You erased me the moment I entered this house. You knew I was not yours, you all knew, and you chose silence. The room froze. My mother's eyes flickered, her lips parting slightly. My father's jaw tightened. The uncles shifted uncomfortably. Only Clara's presence at my side kept me from shaking. My father's voice dropped. You do not understand what you're saying. I understand perfectly, I said. I was brought here to fill a void, to cover a wound you did not want others to see, and then you punished me for existing because I was never the child you lost. I was the reminder of what you lacked. Silence fell heavy, suffocating. Finally, my mother whispered, "It is true." The words cracked the air like lightning. She would not meet my gaze. Her hands twisted in her lap, pale and trembling. You were never mine, not by blood. We thought we were giving you a chance. I laughed bitterly. A chance to grow up invisible, to carry silence on my back until it bent my spine? You did not give me a chance, you gave me a cage. Lucas slammed his hand on the table. Enough, you owe this family everything. Without us, you would have been nothing. I stepped forward, my voice rising for the first time. No, without you, I became everything. I survived your silence, I endured your absence. I built myself in the cracks you left behind. You cannot take credit for what you abandoned. The room buzzed with anger and unease. My father's face darkened. If you walk away now, you walk away from everything we gave you. I drew a breath, steady and clear. You gave me nothing, and walking away is not loss, it is freedom. I pulled the folder from my bag and dropped it on the table. Letters, notes, copies of the packages, every lie they had written in their own hand. Here is the story you created. Here is the proof of your control. If you try to come after me again, this goes public. Every word, every manipulation, every attempt to rewrite history. They stared at the pile, silent. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in their eyes. I straightened. "This is the last time you will see me. The storm ends here." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked toward the door. Clara followed, her footsteps steady behind mine. Outside, the night was cold but clear, the stars sharp against the sky. I breathed deeply, the air burning in my lungs. For the first time, I felt the silence not as absence but as peace. Clara touched my shoulder. "You did it," I nodded. "No, I finally spoke. That is what ended it." We walked away from the house together, leaving the storm behind. The weeks after the confrontation felt like stepping out of a darkened theater into the morning sun. My eyes squinted against the brightness, my skin prickled in the open air, and for the first time in years, I could breathe without bracing for the next shadow. At first, the quiet unsettled me. I had grown so used to the rhythm of their pursuit, the letters, the packages, the sudden appearances, that silence felt unnatural. I half expected another envelope under the door, another call filled with accusations. But none came. The house that had once loomed like a prison behind me finally stayed silent. Work consumed my days, though in a gentler way now. I no longer used it as a shield. I threw myself into projects because I wanted to, not because I was hiding. Henry noticed the change first. "You seem lighter," he said one afternoon as we walked out of the office together. I smiled without explaining. Some truths were too heavy to share, even with kind eyes. Clara remained my anchor. We met often, sometimes in her apartment, sometimes in mine, sometimes in cafes where the hum of strangers made us feel safe. She listened without judgment, reminded me I had done the right thing, and held my silences without fear. One evening, as we sat by her window watching the city lights flicker, she said softly, "You turned silence into something they could never understand. You made it yours." Her words stayed with me. In the solitude of my apartment, I continued to write. Page after page filled with reflections, memories, fragments of dreams. I no longer wrote just to survive. I wrote to remember, to honor the girl I had been, the woman I was becoming. I wrote so that the silence of my past would not swallow me whole again. One morning, as I packed my bag for work, my eyes fell on the box under the bed. The letters, the photo album, the packages, the evidence of everything I had endured. For weeks I had left it untouched, unwilling to face it again. But now I pulled it out and opened it. I sifted through the contents slowly. The bitterness was still there, sharp and raw, but layered over it was something new: strength. These were not just weapons they had used against me. They were proof of survival, proof that I had endured, that I had spoken, that I had broken free. I carried the box to the balcony. The morning was crisp, the sky pale blue. One by one, I fed the letters into a small flame. The paper curled and blackened, words dissolving into smoke. The photo album followed, the smiling faces consumed by fire. I watched until everything had turned to ash, until the box was empty, until the wind carried the last traces away. When it was done, I stood there for a long time, the sun warming my skin. The silence around me was deep but no longer heavy. It was open, wide, filled with possibility. In the weeks that followed, I began to dream differently. Not of empty rooms or voices that never turned toward me. I dreamed of walking down streets lit with lanterns, of climbing mountains where the air was thin and clean, of sitting at tables where people laughed and looked me in the eye. I dreamed of futures, not pasts. Clara and I made plans. Small at first, weekend trips, concerts, dinners with friends, then bigger ones. We talked about traveling to Europe, about seeing the places that had once only been pictures in books. I began to imagine myself not just surviving, but living. On the night before our first trip, I sat by the window one last time with my journal. I lit a candle and let the words flow. The storm is over. They believed silence would destroy me, but it became my teacher. They believed blood was unbreakable, but I learned family is not defined by blood. They believed I would crumble without them, but I have built a life they cannot touch. I am not the child they erased. I am not the shadow they tried to bury. I am Rose Romero, and I will not be silent again. I closed the journal, blew out the candle, and felt the night embrace me without fear. The storm had passed, and I remained. Stronger, clearer, unbroken, ready for the life ahead.